Hello, we are Group 3, and today we're going to inform you on serial killers, their traits and common shared factors of what makes someone a serial killer, and the specific lives of the select 4 killers that take their home in the most notorious place for serial killers, America. Serial killers come in many shapes and sizes. Contrary to what movies and books make you think, they are not just the freaks that live in a cabin in the woods. They easily blend into society and can sneak under the radar of police and citizens until it's far too late. Serial killers are different from your average murderer in more than a few ways. A serial killer must have at least 2 or more relatable kills to be considered a serial killer. On the screen is a graph of serial killers and the amount of victims they've had, ranging from 2, 3, 4, 5, and above 5. The victims usually all share a common trait such as race, appearance, sex, or age group. Sexual contact is often involved with the victim before, after, and during the kill. These people often share... serial killers are also different from mass murderers, as most of them meticulously plan out each kill far beyond just picking a place and time to do a mass murdering. And they have cooling off periods in between kills where their psychological need to kill is sated for the time being, and they can actually grow out of the disorder and end up never being caught. They share common traits, and the frequently most seen one is abuse in their childhood, usually from a family member, and this is often reflected in the types of people they choose to kill later in life. They also share, most serial killers are found to have one of the 3 following traits: a fascination with starting fires when they were a kid, a willingness to harm or kill animals, and bedwetting into their early teenage years. We will now discuss 4 of the most well-known serial killers who were born and did their killings in America: Manson, Gacy, Bundy, and Dahmer.
When I stand on the mountain and I say, do it, it gets done. If it don't get done, then I'll move on it. And that's the last thing in the world you want me to do.
Every one of you out there tried to kill me for the last 25 years, and I'm still here. Ha, ha, ha. Now what?
Charles Manson is a name that most of us have heard of. Manson, who in the 60s led a group of people in a killing spree that left many people dead. Although he never actually killed anyone, his influence and brainwashing of his followers led to their deaths, and now Manson spends his life behind prison bars, never to see the light of day again. He is the most infamous serial killer who has never actually killed a person himself. Charles Manson was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, to 16-year-old Kathleen Maddox. Kathleen had run away from home at 15, spent the next few decades drinking too much and periods in jail. Reportedly, during his childhood, his mother sold him for a pitcher of beer to a woman who wanted to have children. And later, his uncle had to go find him and get him back. Later, he took his stepfather's name, William Manson, his last name. Since his mother couldn't take care of him, he spent his youth in homes of various relatives, reform schools, and boys' homes. By age 9, Charles Manson already started stealing, burglary, and stealing cars. From 1958, Manson was in and out of jail for a variety of offenses, including pimping, passing stolen checks, conning women out of money, and sent to McNeil Island Prison in Washington State for 10 years. During this time, he also raped a fellow male prisoner with brandishing a razor. Manson was released on March 1967, and the following year, he would spearhead a murderous campaign that would make him one of the most infamous figures in criminal history. In many ways, Manson reflects personality traits and obsessions that are associated with gurus, cult quasi-religious groups that began to emerge in the 60s and still are around today. He was pathologically deluded into believing he was a harbinger of doom regarding the planet's future, in much the same way the cult evangelists claim knowledge of the world's end. After 1967, Manson gathered a group of followers who shared his passion for an unconventional lifestyle and habitual use of hallucinogenic drugs, such as LSD and magic mushrooms. The family, as they became known, moved to San Francisco and later to his deserted ranch in San Fernando Valley. His followers, numbering around 100, also included a small, hardcore unit of impressionable young girls, they began to believe, without question, his claims that he was Jesus and his prophecies of a race war. When the Beatles released their White Album, Manson believed the song Helter Skelter was predicted an upcoming race war. Helter Skelter, Manson believed, was going to occur in the summer of '69, when the black people were going to rise up and slaughter all the white people. He told his followers that they'd be saved because they would go underground, literally, traveling to an underground city of gold located in Death Valley. In July 1969, Manson sent some family members to the house of an acquaintance to persuade him to turn over money they thought he got inherited. They held the uncooperative man for 2 days, during which Manson showed up with a sword, slashing at his ears. After that, on Manson's orders, the family stabbed him to death. Before leaving the house, they used blood to write in the walls and to draw a panther paw, the Black Panther symbol. In August of 1969, Manson and a few members of his family raided the residence of Roman Polanski, a movie director. At the residence, the Manson family killed 5 people, including actress Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger, the heiress of the Folger Company. The next night, they killed Leo and Rosemary LaBianca, stabbing him 28 times and her 41 times with a bayonet. Because of the way these murders are committed, many people still remember the gruesome details. Susan Atkins, one of the Manson family members that killed Sharon Tate, drank her blood and also wanted to cut the baby out of her womb to bring it to Manson, but she didn't have time to get that far. In January of 1971, Manson was convicted of first-degree murder for directing the deaths of the Tate LaBianca victims. He was sentenced to death, but in 1972, it got changed to life because the California Supreme Court outlawed the death penalty. Manson now serves a life sentence and periodically comes up for parole. Though he's been in prison for 3 decades, Charles Manson has received more mail than any other prisoner in the United States. Charles Manson is currently being held at California's Corcoran prison. At his last parole hearing in 2012, he was found to be manipulative, controlling, suffering from schizophrenic and paranoid delusional behavior, which made him too great of a danger to be released. His next parole hearing will be when he's 92 years old. A woman named Afton Burton, who calls herself Star, claimed that she and Manson are in a relationship. At the age of 19, she moved from Illinois to California to be near the prison where Manson was incarcerated. In November of 2014, 26-year-old Star and 80-year-old Manson got a marriage license. Star also runs several websites aimed at getting Manson released from prison and proclaiming his innocence. However, their marriage license expired in 2015, and allegations were made in February that Star primarily intended to marry Manson to display his corpse publicly for profit after he died. And since my dad couldn't make it today, he lives in New Hampshire, I thought I'd end with a family picture. This is my dad, and this is Charles Manson. Are they related? I don't know. What am I going to end up looking like? I might need the number for the Dr. M show.
So John Wayne Gacy, who is also known as the Killer Clown, was born March 17th, 1942. He had a really difficult childhood. His father was really, really tough on him. He was an alcoholic, his father was. Was also very verbally and physically abusive. He was close with his sisters and his mother, and much to the disappointment of his father, he enjoyed cooking with his sisters and gardening with his mother. He had he had a rare heart condition that prevented him from participating in sports and athletics, which was also gave his father a great disappointment because he couldn't be like the other boys who participated in sports and that sort of thing. His father often beat him with a razor strap and even knocked young John Wayne Gacy unconscious when his father hit him in the head with a broomstick. Even with all this, Gacy strived to seek his father's approval through everything. At the age of 7, Gacy was also sexually molested by a male family friend who used to take him for rides in his truck, but he never told his father as he feared that his father would blame him for that happening. He also suffered from blackouts, seizures, and a burst appendix throughout middle school and high school, and was occasionally hospitalized. His father even accused him of faking these medical issues, and even said that he was doing this to gain sympathy even while he was laying in a hospital bed. His father called him a sissy, a mama's boy, and even said that he would, quote, probably grow up queer. Though Gacy never graduated from high school, He ended up enrolling and eventually graduated from the Northwestern Business College in 1963. Ended up taking a job in a shoe store in 1964 where he met and was engaged to his first wife, Marilyn Myers. He soon then became heavily involved in politics and joined the United States Junior Chamber, or the JCs, as they call themselves. He eventually moved with his wife to Waterloo, Iowa, and had 2 children, Michael and Christine. In 1967, he was named Outstanding Vice President by the Waterloo JC chapter and served on the organization's board of directors. So he was doing really well for himself, both professionally and within the organization and the community. His first crime occurred in that same year, 67, when the son of a fellow JC member, Donald Voorhees, was lured to Gacy's house, and Gacy forced him to perform oral sex on him and gave him $50 to not say anything to anybody about it. Of course, the boy did, and Gacy was sentenced to 10 years in prison for sodomy. And it was, at the time, it was a huge shock, obviously, because this guy was like a pillar of the community. He was well-liked by all his friends and everyone in the community. And when he went to prison, he received the same sort of ovation from fellow inmates. He was really well-liked, and he ended up only serving 18 months of a sentence of 10 years. And as part of a probation condition, he ended up relocating back to Chicago, but he had to live with his mother for the first year of probation. And it was at this point where Gacy began to start his murders, which spanned from 1972 to 1978. Somehow, his record of the sodomy charge in Iowa did not follow him back to Chicago, and no one was aware of what he had done previously. And this helped him to carefully maintain his double life as a community leader and a businessman. He started his own business, construction business, called PDM Contractors, which stood for Painting, Decorating, and Maintenance, and only employed young men and teenage boys. He would often lure the boys to his home or invite them over for drinks before he murdered them. He also, in addition, was a Democratic precinct captain and even dressed up as a clown, hence the name Killer Clown. You weren't scared of clowns before, you probably will be now. He would dress up as this alternate ego he called himself Pogo the Clown, and this guy would go out and he would do children's parties, and he would entertain people who were sick in hospitals, and he was really well liked in the community. The one way that he would kill all his victims was he would do what he called the handcuff trick, where he would lure the young men or teenage boys over and say, "Hey, try on these handcuffs, I'll give you $100 if you can figure out how to get out of them." And then he'd say, "The trick is you have to have the key," which he had. And then he would proceed to rape and then end up gagging the victims with their own clothing. And then he buried 26 out of 33 of the bodies in the crawl space of his home. And no one was able to. He would lay lime down like all the time so that no one was aware of the smell of the decomposing bodies. Eventually, it ended up catching up to him. His final murder was a 15-year-old boy named Robert Piest. And the police began to get suspicious of Gacy and ended up looking up his criminal record and found his previous sodomy charge for Iowa and began following him everywhere. And it was really interesting because Gacy he was well aware that they were following him. He would invite them into his home for dinner. They would follow him in a restaurant. He would pick up their tab like nothing was wrong, and he was acting very normal, which is extremely strange. Eventually, police were able to get a warrant and search his home, and Gacy ended up confessing in December 1978 and showed the police where all the bodies were hiding in this crawl space. 26 of the bodies were in the crawl space of his home, and 7, once he ran out of room, were dumped in the Des Plaines River. He did attempt an insanity plea, but was found guilty of the murders in 1980 and sentenced to death by lethal injection. Something I thought was really interesting is at the time of the trial, Gacy was much more concerned of the public viewing him as a homosexual than a serial killer. He was very adamant about not wanting to appear as a homosexual, and he really didn't care if they thought he was a serial killer. May 10th, 1994, John Wayne Gacy died by lethal injection, and his last words were, "Kiss my ass." Nice guy. I have a clip here from the movie about his life, appropriately named Gacy. The clip, along with the entire movie, has a really creepy undertone, and I think this clip shows how well he was received in the community. He was really a pillar of that community and really well liked by everybody. And I think that this shows that.
Hey, everybody, listen up here. This is our alderman, Mr. Ted Doyle, and his lovely wife, Julie.
Good people, you are truly fortunate to have as a friend and colleague John Wayne Gacy, a good man, a great Democrat, and who knows, maybe even the next precinct captain. Let me tell you a little about this man. If it wasn't for John Wayne Gacy, none of the streetlights in this town would have a number on them. You have John to thank for that. He is a real inspiration and role model to children. And as far as I'm concerned, a living embodiment of the American dream.
So I think that clip gives you a pretty good idea of no one really had any idea that this was going on. As you can see, they were saying he was a role model to children, which obviously he was not. This picture that I included here was a picture of him in 1975 when he was the Democratic precinct captain. He was appointed director of Chicago's annual Polish Constitution Day Parade, and it was through that event where he met and was photographed here with then First Lady Rosalind Carter. So this serial killer was walking around, and it was, ended up, and I think the pin that he's wearing right there has an S on it. It's kind of hard to see, but which anyone who's wearing that pin has access to, forego the Secret Service, and it was a lot of egg on the face of the government at the time. So.
Okay, I'll be talking to you about Ted Bundy. He was born November 24th in 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. He was born with the name Theodore Robert Cowell. His mother was 22 and unmarried, and his grandparents were very, very religious and really were not happy with her that she had a kid, obviously when she wasn't married. So they actually raised him, his grandparents. He thought that they were his real parents and that his sister, or that his mother was his sister. He had a really strong interest in the macabre when they were at a very young age. He loved all the dark stuff, and he had a really strong fascination with knives. When he was a teenager, he would look into people's windows and watch them. This is actually a picture from his senior year, so you can imagine that, just peering into your windows when you're at home. He would also steal a lot and would never show any sort of remorse for what he did. So he went away to the University of Washington. He fell in love with this beautiful, dark-haired woman. Her name was Stephanie Brooks. Eventually, they had broken up after about a year or so. And what's interesting is that a lot of his victims were all pretty dark-haired women, and they think that that breakup was kind of the trigger for him to go on his murderous rampage between the years of about 1970 and 1978. He killed, officially have killed over 30 women, although they think that it could have been all the way up to 100. So while he was in the University of Washington, many women had started to go mysteriously and disappear. One thing that they all had in common is that they were last seen with a young, dark-haired man named Ted. So eventually he graduated from the University of Washington in 1972 with a psych degree, and for whatever reason he decided to move to Utah to pursue a law school degree. And so while in Utah, the same thing happened. All these women just started disappearing out of nowhere. Eventually he was arrested. He was pulled over by the police, and they searched his car, and what they found was a crowbar, mask, rope, and handcuffs. This connected him to many other crimes in the area, including some of those murders. So 2 years later, he was indicted on a murder charge of a woman from Colorado. And while at the courthouse, he decided that he would be his own lawyer, so he was just kind of taking care of himself. He actually jumped out a window and escaped, but was eventually captured 8 days later. And eventually, or in 1975, also, he was at a mall, and he pretended that he was a police officer and eventually lured a woman, her name was Carol DeRonch, into his car and eventually drove away. However, she did escape, and that was also one of the things that he was charged for while in Colorado. In December of 1977, while he was still in prison, he had created a hole in his cell ceiling and crawled through it. He did lose 30 pounds to actually fit through it, and he actually was not reported missing for 15 hours. So in that gave him a step ahead. He made his way to Tallahassee, Florida. January 15th, 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house in FSU. He killed 2 sleeping women. Their names were Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman. He sexually assaulted both of them and strangled them. He had also seriously injured 2 other girls by bludgeoning them. February 1978, he abducted, raped, and killed 12-year-old Kimberly Leach and was arrested 6 days later. In July of 1979, he was convicted for the murders of the Chi Omega girls. They found a bite mark on one of the girls, Lisa, and compared it with his teeth, and that's how they got him. He was given 2 death penalties for the 2 girls and 1 more for Kimberly Leach. So eventually, he spent 2 years in prison. He was trying to avoid his death sentence so much that he actually tried to bribe people by saying, I'll give you information on all these unsolved murders if you just don't give me the chair. But he did actually end up getting the electric chair on January 24th, 1989. He was put to death in Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida. So obviously, it does make him a serial killer. He fits the criteria because all of the women that he killed, or at least most of them, had this long dark hair, which takes him back to his original girlfriend, Stephanie. And they're all killed in the same way. Normally it's strangulation, and he also did sexually assault many of them.
Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer is born May 21st, 1960. Bouncing baby boy, pretty attractive man up until the fact that from ages 10 to 15, being raised only by his father, he begins to become strangely antisocial, very withdrawn. He begins heavily drinking in high school. And as he continues drinking, his father sends him to military camp, and he actually joins the army, and then is promptly kicked out of the army for alcoholism. After that, his 18th birthday comes around, and that's when he kills his first victim, Stephen Hicks. Stephen Hicks is a hitchhiker, just minding his own business. Jeffrey Dahmer's father is out of town, so he invites Hicks over for beers. When Hicks tries to leave, Jeffrey Dahmer hits him over the head with a 10-pound dumbbell, killing him, and then he rapes his dead corpse. He is known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. He ate most of his victims, but not all of them, and that's really unknown. No one really knows why he only ate some as opposed to others. The different thing about Jeffrey Dahmer, however, is he didn't stick to one race. He killed 17 males from the ages of 14 to 32. 3 of those are 14-year-olds, and they were all of different races. Jeffrey Dahmer was kicked out of his father's house after the first murder, but it's not his father. His father kicked him out after being kicked out of the military for alcoholism, and no one knew he was a murderer at that time. Jeffrey Dahmer moved to Florida to live with his grandmother, and she began finding very odd and disturbing things around the house. 2 of those items are a .357 Magnum under his bed and a male mannequin in his closet. Dahmer dissected animals, mainly squirrels and stray cats, in the grandmother's basement and would get rid of the bodies by dissolving them in acid. His grandmother, slightly senile, very ill, she never really noticed, but she was very uncomfortable with him living in the house. Seeing as his father would not take him back because of his alcoholism, she had to deal with him for a little bit longer. In 1982 and 1986, Dahmer was arrested, not for the murder that he's already committed, but for public nudity. He was released in 2 short 8-month sentences after both arrests, and then his grandmother had kicked him out. Dahmer's most notable murder is the murder of a 14-year-old Filipino child. Well, that's Dahmer, his first public exposure, public decency arrest. And these are his victims. Conrad was 14 years old, and he was a Filipino boy living with his mother, who had 3 jobs to sustain their life when it was only her. He was drugged and picked up by Dahmer from a park when his mother was working the night shift. He was drugged and raped and attacked by Dahmer when Dahmer took him into his home, and at some point the child actually escaped. Was drugged and was staggering, but he ran down the streets crying and screaming for help. 2 women found the child, called the police, and when the police arrived, against everything the women had said, once Dahmer showed up claiming to be his 19-year-old boyfriend, they let the child go back with Dahmer without checking his background, without asking for ID or a name. They just believed Dahmer and handed him the child. That night, he re-raped him and killed him. Dahmer killed 5 more people after this incident and was only caught because of a strange smell in his house, which the attendants in the apartment building that he lived in thought it was a gas leak. They only found out because they were checking every apartment building, and they found skulls, body parts in the fridge, and an odd shrine dedicated to men in one of the bedrooms. During the trial, Dahmer tried to play the insanity plate, but was found completely sane for all of these murders, rapes, and attacks. He was under many evaluation tests, and most of the doctors couldn't agree on one thing that was wrong with him because there was just so much wrong with him they couldn't necessarily decide on one. So they decided on 5. He was afflicted with complicated comorbid psychopathologies. He was given 5 mental disorders that he had. One was borderline personality disorder, one was major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, which he tried to use, saying that seeing young boys made him anxious, so he had to kill them because they were asking for it. He had substance use disorder, which was alcohol, and he also tried to claim that as he was drunk the entire time, so it wasn't his fault because he was under the influence. And he had sexual paraphilia disorder, which is what he claimed made him want to rape the dead corpses of his victims and attack these poor children.
In conclusion, all these serial killers had similar traits in their histories and went about going killing in their own personal and twisted ways, though most of them either end up here or here. It makes you wonder if there are killers out there that are, for lack of a better word, better or more efficient than the ones we spoke of, never getting caught, going completely under the radar, and just growing out of it and never coming to the public about what they do.